Everyone froze when a lone soldier and his loyal dog discovered a hidden cave buried beneath the snow of Alder Ridge. At first, he thought it was just another shelter from the storm. But when he opened that door of stone, the air itself seemed to whisper. Inside, he found an old man who had lived there for decades, guarding a secret older than time, a covenant between man, nature, and God. What they uncovered that night would test faith, awaken hope, and prove that miracles don't always come from heaven. Sometimes they rise from the earth. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If you believe that faith can still move mountains, hit subscribe, share this story with someone you love, and type Amen in the comments below. Because tonight's story might just remind you that God still speaks, even through the silence of snow. The morning light over Alder Ridge was thin and fractured, a pale wash against the heavy winter sky. The forest lay frozen, each branch draped in white silence. The air was knife cold, the kind that burned the lungs with every breath. Ethan Rowe trudged through the snow with the steady rhythm of someone who had long forgotten how to hurry. He was 42, tall and broad-shouldered but thinned by years of solitude. His face was the kind that looked carved rather than born. Sharp jawline, rough beard flecked with gray, skin weathered by mountain wind and military sandstorms alike. His eyes, a tired steel blue, carried the stillness of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. He moved as if the world might collapse if he disturbed it too loudly. Beside him, his dog Scout padded through the drifts, each step silent and precise. Scout was an 8-year-old German short-haired pointer, lean and powerful, his coat mottled gray and white like melting frost. His amber eyes flicked between the trees, alert yet calm, the expression of an animal that understood his master's moods better than anyone alive. He was no longer young, his muzzle touched with silver, but his movements retained the grace of instinct honed by years of hunting and companionship. Ethan had been a soldier once, long before the snow and the silence. He had served in Iraq, a place of heat and dust and noise, where the air smelled of gunpowder and diesel. He had watched friends die and promises fade, and when he finally came home, the world had already moved on without him. Mira, his wife, the one soft voice that could quiet the noise in his head, had died 3 winters ago, leaving their small cabin on the edge of Alder Ridge colder than any storm could make it. Since then, he hunted not for food, but for rhythm, for something that reminded him life still had a pattern, even when it no longer had a purpose. The forest that morning felt alive in a way it hadn't before. The storm of the previous night had scoured everything clean. No footprints, no scent of deer, only untouched snow sparkling faintly in the gray light. Ethan paused at a clearing, his breath rising in soft clouds. The world was so quiet it seemed to be holding its breath. Scout's nose lifted to the wind, then dipped again, tracing invisible trails beneath the surface. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, his voice rough from disuse. The sound barely reached beyond his scarf. He crouched, brushing gloved fingers through the powder. No fresh tracks, nothing moved, and yet something in the stillness felt expectant, like a held note before a song begins. Then Scout froze. Every muscle in his body locked, tail straight, ears tilted forward. Ethan followed the dog's gaze toward a line of pines where the slope of the ridge rose sharply. At first, he saw only the familiar, stone, bark, shadow, but as he narrowed his eyes, he caught it, a line running vertically through a massive rock face, too straight, to be natural. He felt the prickle of instinct, that whisper soldiers never forget. Something's wrong. He moved closer, snow crunching softly under his boots. The rock loomed higher with each step, its surface blackened with ice. When he reached it, he realized it wasn't a single slab but a pair of uneven plates joined by a seam. His gloved hand brushed away a crust of moss, revealing metal beneath, cold, ancient iron streaked with rust. "A door," he muttered under his breath, disbelief threading through the word. Scout sniffed around the base, whining low, his tail flicking nervously. Ethan examined the structure closer. The hinges were half buried, thick with corrosion, but unmistakable. Someone, long ago, had set this door into the mountain itself. The edges were fused with stone, as if nature had tried to reclaim it and failed. The realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. He had walked these woods for years and never seen anything like it. He glanced back over his shoulder, half expecting to see another figure, some hunter, a park ranger, but there was only the endless whiteness. Probably an old mine shaft, he told himself, though he didn't believe it. The air around the door was warmer, faintly breathing against his face, carrying a smell that wasn't metal or decay. It smelled of smoke and pine resin. Scout pawed at the snow near the threshold, letting out a sharp bark. Ethan hesitated only a moment longer before gripping the handle. It was smoother than he expected, as though worn by countless hands. When he pulled, the hinges protested with a deep animal groan. Snow sifted from the rock above, and a gust of warm air spilled out, smelling faintly of wood smoke and herbs. He stepped back instinctively, heart pounding. The darkness beyond wasn't the void of a cave. It shimmered faintly with the reflection of something, firelight perhaps, or lantern glow, deep inside. "Stay close," Ethan whispered. Scout's ears twitched, but he obeyed, stepping cautiously through the doorway. Ethan followed, the crunch of snow fading into the muffled sound of boots on stone. The air grew thicker, warmer. His eyes adjusted to dim light that flickered along the curved walls of the tunnel. The passage wasn't natural. Its sides were smooth, shaped by hand and tool. Wooden beams supported the ceiling at intervals, each carved with faint markings. Symbols he didn't recognize, but they looked old. Older than the cabins scattered through the valley, older than the town that slept beyond the ridge. He could hear Scout's breathing ahead, steady but quickened with curiosity. Ethan felt the same pulse in his chest. Fear, yes, but something else too. Wonder. It had been years since anything had made him feel small in a good way. The tunnel sloped downward, the air thickening with the scent of cedar and something earthy like soil after rain. Somewhere ahead, water dripped. Rhythmically, a sound both soothing and eerie. He raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The walls glistened faintly, streaked with mineral veins. Scout stopped suddenly, growling low. The sound echoed down the passage, swallowed by the dark. Ethan tensed, raising the light. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a shadow pulling back, the faint suggestion of a figure retreating into deeper blackness. He blinked, and it was gone. "Probably my eyes," he muttered, though his pulse disagreed. He crouched beside Scout, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "We'll check it out. Just a quick look, then we head back." But even as he said it, he knew he wouldn't turn back. There was a pull here, something ancient and magnetic. The forest had led him to this place, step by step, as if guiding him toward a purpose he hadn't known he was missing. He took another step forward, then another. The light from his torch caught on something ahead, a faint glimmer of glass or metal. The passage widened into a chamber. In its center stood an old wooden table covered with jars, books, and tools, all coated with a thin film of dust. Against the far wall flickered a small lantern, its flame wavering but alive. Someone had been here. Recently. Ethan's breath caught. He wasn't alone. He turned slowly, the beam of light trembling slightly in his grasp. "Hello?" His voice carried softly through the hollow space, met only by the slow echo of dripping water. Scout growled again, ears flat, eyes locked on the shadows beyond the lantern. And then, a sound. A quiet scrape of movement deeper in the dark, like footsteps on stone. Ethan raised his flashlight higher, his breath held tight in his throat. The light caught on something. A glint of metal, the curve of a tool, the edge of what might have been a coat sleeve. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice firm now, the soldier's tone slipping back like muscle memory. No answer, only silence. But the lantern flame wavered again, as if stirred by a breath that wasn't his. He felt Scout press against his leg, the dog trembling, ready but uncertain. Ethan's own heart matched the rhythm of the dripping water. He swallowed, stepped forward, and the beam found it. Something impossible, something that made his stomach turn cold. There, at the edge of the light, carved into the rock itself, were marks that formed a symbol. An open eye encircled by roots and branches, the same symbol he'd seen once, years ago, on a burned village sign outside Mosul. His hand dropped to his side, trembling. The past and present seemed to merge, war and wilderness folding together. "Dear God," he whispered. Behind him the door creaked softly, closing on its own, and the last of the daylight vanished. The air inside the mountain pressed in like a living thing. Ethan stood motionless, the beam of his flashlight shaking slightly as the sound of the door's heavy thud faded into silence. The temperature was warmer now, a dry, almost smoky heat that clung to his skin. Scout pressed close to his leg, his breathing shallow, the faint whine of uncertainty slipping from his throat. Ethan's instincts screamed for control. The same disciplined calm he'd learned overseas when chaos erupted in narrow streets and shadows moved before gunfire. But this wasn't war. This was something older, deeper. He took one step forward, then another, the crunch of gravel under his boots echoing too loud. "Hello?" he called again, voice firm but low, trying to sound less like a man intruding and more like one who simply wanted an answer. Nothing came back. His light swept over the chamber, the table, the tools, a rough cot along the far wall. Dust lay thick in places, disturbed in others. Someone had lived here recently. The smell of burnt wood and herbs still lingered, sharp but not unpleasant. Then, from the dark tunnel beyond the lantern's flicker, came a voice, rough and old, like wind passing through bark. "You shouldn't have opened it." Ethan spun, flashlight steady now, trained toward the voice. A figure stepped into the light, slow and deliberate. He was tall but stooped with age, wrapped in a heavy wool coat patched with different shades of brown. His beard was silver white, long enough to brush his chest, his hair tied loosely at the back. The deep lines of his face looked carved by years of weather and solitude. Yet his eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear, seemed untouched by time, sharp as winter glass. The old man raised one hand, palm out, a gesture of calm. "Don't point that light at me. It bites harder than it should." Ethan hesitated but lowered the beam slightly. His soldier's caution warred with curiosity. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said carefully. "The door was open." "No, it wasn't," the man replied, his tone neither hostile nor welcoming, simply matter-of-fact. "It hasn't been open in years." He moved closer with surprising steadiness, each step measured, controlled. Scout gave a low growl. The man's eyes flicked down. "Fine-looking dog," he said. "Pointer, isn't he? I had one once. Loyal, too loyal sometimes." Ethan exhaled, tension softening just slightly. "Name's Ethan Rowe," he said, his voice still guarded. "I live out past the ridge." The man studied him for a long moment before answering. "Walter Kane," he said finally. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Rowe." Ethan took in the details of the space, now that his mind had caught up. Shelves carved into the rock walls filled with jars and old notebooks, a small stove with a pipe running upward, vanishing into the stone ceiling, and a faint hum of wind from somewhere deeper, inside. Everything here was purposeful. It was not madness or chaos. It was order. Walter moved past him, his movements quiet and assured. "I thought the mountain had finished calling," he muttered. "Seems I was wrong." He reached for the lantern and adjusted its flame. The light flared briefly, illuminating more of the chamber. Etched along one wall were markings, some written, others carved deep, maps, symbols, dates, and strange looping sketches of trees and rivers. Ethan stepped closer, fascinated. "You did these?" Walter nodded. "Most of them. Others were here long before me." Ethan frowned. "This place, who built it?" The old man's eyes glinted with something unreadable. People who listened to the land when it still had a voice, before they learned to silence it with machines. Ethan was silent for a moment. The words, poetic and strange, didn't sound like madness. They sounded like memory. He recognized that tone, the quiet defiance of someone who had lost everything once and refused to lose what remained. Walter gestured toward a wooden stool. "If you come this far, you might as well sit. You look like a man who's been walking too long without knowing why." Ethan hesitated, then sat. The warmth from the nearby stove seeped through his jacket, chasing away the mountain chill. Scout lay at his feet, still watchful, his eyes following every movement of the hermit. Walter poured hot water from a kettle into a mug carved from wood. He added dried leaves from a jar, the scent of pine and earth filling the air. "Tea," he said simply, passing it across the table. "It's not much, but it keeps the blood talking." Ethan accepted it with a nod. "You've been here long?" Long enough to stop counting winters, Walter said. He took a seat opposite, folding his hands around his own cup. Most men stop looking for this place before the snow takes them. The forest doesn't give it up easily. Ethan sipped the tea. It was bitter but clean, the warmth spreading slowly through him. I wasn't looking, he said honestly. Just following my dog. Walter chuckled, a dry sound like leaves underfoot. The best discoveries start that way. His gaze softened for the first time. But you look like a man still running from something, not toward it. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The old man's eyes said he already knew. The silence stretched between them, comfortable in its weight. Walter leaned back, his expression distant. Used to be a ranger, he said suddenly. Forest Service. Before the fires, before the companies stripped the valley. Thought I could stop them once. He smiled faintly, without joy. I learned you can't fight greed with rules. Ethan listened quietly. He recognized that tone too, the exhaustion of someone who had fought a losing battle for something sacred. Walter stood and walked toward the far wall, running, his fingers across the carvings. This mountain remembers, every tree, every stream, it's all connected. But people forgot how to listen, so I stayed behind to remind it that not everyone had. There was no madness in his words, only conviction. Ethan found himself leaning forward slightly. Why seal yourself in here? The old man looked back over his shoulder. Because some things survive better in silence, his voice dropped, and because I wasn't ready to forgive the noise outside. A gust of wind moaned through the tunnel, making the lantern flame shiver. Ethan turned toward the sound. There's another passage? Walter nodded. A few, the mountain's full of them. They change sometimes after storms, like veins shifting under skin. He poured more water into the kettle, setting it back on the stove. You'll learn the rhythm if you stay long enough. Ethan glanced toward the closed door, its seam now invisible in the stone. About that, he said quietly. It shut on its own. Walter's expression didn't change. It does that. Keeps out what doesn't belong. A long silence followed. Scout's breathing slowed, the dog finally resting his head on his paws. Ethan felt a strange calm settle in, an unexpected sense of belonging, as though the mountain itself had drawn him here not by accident, but by design. Walter broke the quiet. You'll need to decide soon, he said. Decide what? Whether you're a visitor, the old man said, eyes glinting in the lamplight, or something the mountain means to keep. Before Ethan could respond, a distant rumble shuddered through the ground, faint but unmistakable. The lantern wavered again, and small flakes of dust drifted from the ceiling. Scout sprang to his feet, barking once, sharp and alarmed. Walter set down his cup slowly, eyes narrowing. They've come back, he murmured. Who? Ethan asked. The old man didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was almost a whisper. The ones who tried to burn it before. They always come back. Ethan rose, the old soldier in him stirring awake. The air around them thickened with the scent of smoke, faint but real. Somewhere beyond the mountain walls, something was moving again. And for the first time, Ethan realized the door behind him might not just keep things out. It might also be keeping something in. The rumble deep beneath Alder Ridge faded into a tense, echoing silence. Dust drifted through the air like ash, glowing faintly in the lamplight. Ethan's pulse slowed, but the heaviness in his chest didn't ease. Scout stood rigid by his side, the fur along his spine raised, amber eyes fixed on the black mouth of the tunnel that stretched deeper into the mountain. Ethan could still smell smoke, faint but distinct, the sharp metallic scent that once meant danger on foreign soil. Walter Kane watched the tunnel for a long moment, unmoving. The old man's expression hardened into something Ethan hadn't seen before, not fear, but memory. It's happening again, Walter murmured, his voice low, hoarse. The mountain remembers fire. Ethan turned to him. You said they came back. Who exactly are you talking about? Walter leaned against the table, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the lantern. Years ago, he said slowly, a company came through here. Timbermen. They said they had permission from Washington to clear Alder Ridge for development, roads, resorts, progress, they called it. His tone twisted around that last word, as if it had a bitter taste. We tried to stop them, me and my rangers, but you can't reason with men who see trees as numbers. He moved to the wall and traced one of the carved symbols, an eye surrounded by roots and branches, the same one Ethan had seen earlier. They burned half the valley trying to force the animals out. I lost my team in that fire, and my family. After that, I stayed behind to make sure no one forgot what was buried here. Ethan listened in silence. The story carried the weight of truth, the kind that didn't need embellishment. He recognized it in Walter's voice, the same tone soldiers used when recounting what they'd survived but never escaped. "So now what?" Ethan asked. "You think they've come back for the mountain again?" Walter nodded slowly. "They always come back when they think the witnesses are dead." Ethan's mind flashed to the strange warmth that had seeped from the door, the intricate carvings, the man who lived among ghosts. There was more here than greed and lumber. "What is this place really, Walter? Why build all this?" Walter hesitated. Then he motioned for Ethan to follow. "You might as well see it for yourself." He picked up the lantern and led the way down the tunnel that sloped deeper into the mountain. The air cooled as they walked, thick with the smell of damp stone and cedar oil. Scout trotted ahead cautiously, nose twitching. The tunnel twisted, then opened into a vast cavern lit by a dozen softly burning lamps placed along the walls. Ethan stopped, awed. The space was enormous, an underground cathedral carved by both man and time. The ceiling arched high above, its surface glittering with quartz veins that caught the light like frozen lightning. Wooden shelves lined. The walls filled with books, jars, and hand-bound ledgers. In the center stood a great table covered with scrolls, maps, and glass cases containing pressed plants, feathers, and small bones. Walter set down the lantern. "This," he said quietly, "is the mountain's memory." Ethan stepped forward, scanning the shelves. Every object seemed placed with reverence. He picked up a book, its leather cover worn soft, the pages filled with neat handwriting and sketches of plants, animals, and weather cycles. Notes in the margins listed dates going back more than 40 years. "You did all this?" "Most of it," Walter said. "Some belonged to others before me, rangers, scientists, wanderers who cared enough to leave something behind. I collected what I could before the fires." Ethan ran a thumb over the drawings. Wildflowers labeled in Latin, birds cataloged by song. The meticulous care moved him in a way he hadn't expected. "You turned a mountain into a library." Walter smiled faintly. "Not a library, a reminder. When the forest dies, the memory dies with it, unless someone keeps it alive." Scout padded between the tables, sniffing at jars and bundles of herbs. He sneezed once, and Ethan couldn't help a quiet laugh, the first real one in months. Walter's eyes softened at the sound. "He's a good dog," he said. "They sense what we forget." The moment of warmth didn't last. The faint rumble came again, closer this time, followed by a distant metallic clang. The lamps quivered. Ethan looked sharply toward the tunnel. "That's not thunder," he said. Walter's face darkened. "No, that's machinery." Ethan felt the old instincts rising. Calculation, urgency. "How far down does this place go?" "Far enough," Walter said grimly, "but not safe if they're blasting again." He moved toward a wooden chest against the wall and pulled it open. Inside were old field maps, flares, and a battered rifle wrapped in oilcloth. He lifted the gun with care, checking the chamber. "Didn't think I'd need this again." Ethan's eyes flicked to it, recognizing the weight of familiarity in the old man's movements. "You served?" "Vietnam," Walter said. "Back when I thought duty meant following orders instead of protecting what's real." He glanced at Ethan, eyes sharp. "You know that look. You've carried it too." Ethan gave a short nod. "Iraq, different sand, same ghosts." The two men shared a silence that said more than words could. Outside, the faint hum of engines grew stronger, echoing through the stone. Scout barked once, sharp and alert. Walter grabbed a canvas pack and began stuffing notebooks and maps inside. "We can't stay here. If they blow through the lower ridge, the tunnels will collapse. There's another exit through the northern shaft." Ethan moved to help, gathering lanterns and sealing jars into crates. "Who are they now exactly?" "The same company?" Walter's mouth tightened. "New name, same hunger." They call themselves Greenvale Development now. Ironic, isn't it? The man in charge is Franklin Cobb. I met him 20 years ago when he first came with promises of sustainable harvests. He lies easy, that one. Smiles when he steals. Ethan frowned. You think he's after something specific? Walter paused, gaze distant. Not wood this time. Something under it. He touched the carvings on the wall again. The symbols. They found fragments of these on old survey maps, signs of an indigenous settlement, maybe older than recorded history. Cobb wants proof. Proof means ownership. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. And this place, your cave, it's sitting right on top of it. Walter nodded. The mountain's heart. They'd cut it open if it meant one more headline. The rumble grew louder. A faint vibration trembled through the ground, knocking dust from the ceiling. One of the lamps fell and shattered. Flames snuffed instantly in the damp air. Ethan slung the pack over his shoulder and crouched to steady Scout, who was whining now, ears flat. All right, he said quietly. Let's move. Walter led him through a narrow side passage, half hidden behind a curtain of moss and roots. The walls narrowed until they were brushing Ethan's shoulders. The light from their lanterns flickered wildly. As they climbed upward, the sound of drilling and distant shouting echoed faintly through the rock. Men working, unaware of the living history above them. The tunnel opened briefly into a smaller chamber, this one lined with bones and relics arranged in deliberate circles. Skulls of elk and wolf, charms of woven grass, shards of pottery. Walter paused, breathing heavier now. This is older than both of us, he said softly. The people who came before, they believed the mountain was alive. A guardian spirit. The carvings you saw, the eye and the roots, it was their mark of protection. Ethan studied the chamber, the air thick with reverence. Then maybe it's time it protects itself again, he said. Walter gave him a weary but proud look. Maybe that's why you're here. They continued upward until the passage forked. Walter pointed left. That leads to the northern exit, a mile above the tree line. You'll reach open air. Ethan caught the phrasing. You're not coming? Walter shook his head. Not yet. Someone has to make sure they don't destroy what's left. I'll slow them down. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the old man's expression stopped him. The same stubbornness he'd seen in veterans who'd already decided their place was behind the line. Walter pressed a hand to his shoulder. If I don't come out, promise me you'll take the journals, tell them what we saw, make them remember. Ethan hesitated, then nodded once. You have my word. From somewhere below came the crack of an explosion, the walls trembling with force. Scout barked sharply. Rocks rained down from the ceiling. Walter shoved him toward the left tunnel. Go! The mountain won't wait twice! Ethan turned once, their eyes meeting in the flickering light. One man bound by past guilt, the other by new purpose. Then he ran, Scout beside him, up toward the dim glimmer of daylight breaking through cracks in the stone. Behind him, as the sound of the explosion faded, Ethan thought he heard something deeper, a groan like the mountain itself awakening. And then, far below, the echo of another voice, human, desperate, calling his name. Snow was falling again over Alder Ridge, slow and soundless, as Ethan Rowe and his dog burst out from the northern shaft of the mountain. The daylight stabbed his eyes after hours underground. He stumbled into the open, gasping, the cold air biting his throat like smoke. Behind him, the cave's mouth exhaled a plume of dust and ash, the mountain's wounded breath. Scout barked once, circling in the snow, his fur matted with soot. Ethan turned back toward the ridge. The rumble of distant explosions echoed through the valley, faint but steady, like a heartbeat made of thunder. Down below, through the fog, he could see heavy machinery crawling through the pines, black silhouettes of excavators and trucks, their headlights slicing through the storm. The company had come in force. He crouched, wiping his face with a trembling hand. His mind flashed back to Walter, the old man's determined eyes, the way his voice didn't tremble even as the mountain shook. Ethan had promised to carry the journals, to protect the memory of the place. But now, standing under the falling snow, that promise felt like ash in his throat. He opened his pack and saw the bundle of leather-bound books, their edges singed by time. Each one was a heartbeat of the forest, a voice trapped on paper. Ethan gripped them tightly. We're not leaving him, he murmured. Scout tilted his head, ears flicking. We're going back. He looked around. A narrow ledge, a frozen slope, and below that, the skeletal outlines of trees swaying under the wind. Getting back through the same passage was impossible. The entrance had already half collapsed. But there was another way, a ravine that curved around the ridge, leading to the lower base. If the company's drills had opened a new breach, it might lead him back inside. Ethan started moving downhill, boots sliding, Scout bounding ahead with restless energy. The storm thickened, snow cutting sideways like shards of glass. He moved fast, guided more by instinct than sight, his breath coming in bursts. Every sound, the groan of trees, the crack of ice, felt amplified, as if the mountain itself was whispering warnings. Halfway down he spotted movement, 2 men in orange jackets trudging through the snow below, their helmets glinting under floodlights. Workers. He dropped behind a fallen pine, pressing Scout down beside him. The men were talking, their voices muffled by wind. "Cobb says we hit something, some kind of chamber," one said. "Yeah? Then why'd he send us up here?" "Because he doesn't trust the sensors, wants to blow through the ridge before dawn." Ethan's jaw tightened. Franklin Cobb. The name felt like poison now. He waited until they passed, then slipped down the slope, hugging the shadows. At the base of the ridge, the scale of destruction hit him. Trees had been torn down by bulldozers, their roots jutting from the earth like broken bones. Metal scaffolds surrounded. The lower mouth of the mountain, where floodlights illuminated a massive drilling rig, anchored into the rock. Sparks flew as the machinery cut deeper. The sound was unbearable, a mechanical scream ripping through nature's silence. Ethan scanned the area and spotted a familiar shape, Walter's lantern, lying half-buried near a pile of debris. His chest tightened. He moved closer, staying low, until he reached a gap behind a storage crate. From there, he saw him. Walter Kane stood at the edge of the site, half hidden by shadow, leaning on his rifle. His coat was torn, streaked with dirt and blood, but he was alive. The old man's eyes glowed in the light like ice reflecting fire. He was watching the workers, waiting. Ethan's breath caught. He wanted to call out, but Walter's gaze suddenly met his across the distance. The old man shook his head slowly. "Stay back." Then, with the same calm defiance that had marked every word he'd spoken, Walter raised his rifle. The first shot cracked through the storm. A floodlight shattered, plunging half the site into darkness. Shouts erupted. Men scattered. The second shot hit the rig's fuel line. Sparks flared, flames licking upward. "Damn it, Walter," Ethan hissed, heart pounding. He darted from cover, sprinting toward the old man. Scout ran beside him, barking sharply as the workers scrambled for safety. Walter turned as Ethan reached him. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "I don't leave people behind," Ethan snapped. "Not again." A distant explosion cut through their words. Fire blossomed across the ridge, a wave of orange reflected on the falling snow. The storm turned into a maelstrom of ash and wind. Walter grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him toward the trees. "The north slope! If we can reach it, we can bury the tunnel!" They ran, stumbling over roots and frozen brush, Scout weaving between them. The flames grew brighter behind them, feeding on fuel and oxygen. The roar of collapsing machinery echoed like thunder through the mountainside. At the ridge's crest, Walter stopped, gasping. His breath came in ragged clouds, his leg dragging. Ethan turned to help him, but the old man pushed the rifle into his hands. "Finish it," Walter said. "The charges are set in the tunnel. One shot through the line. It'll seal the mountain. Keep them out." Ethan stared at him. "You'll be trapped inside." Walter smiled faintly, eyes glistening with the reflection of fire. "That's where I belong. I'm part of it now." For a moment neither spoke. The storm howled, tearing through the burning forest. Then Ethan nodded once. He took the rifle, steadied his breath, and aimed down toward the glowing line of the tunnel entrance. The gun's report was swallowed by the wind. A second later, the earth convulsed. Fire and snow erupted together, a white and red storm swallowing the ridge. Ethan and Scout were thrown backward into the drifts. When he opened his eyes, the mountain was still again. The machinery was gone, buried under stone and ice. Smoke curled from the sealed mouth of the cave like the breath of a sleeping giant. Ethan crawled to his knees, coughing, scanning the ruins. There was no sign of Walter, only the faint outline of boot prints leading toward the buried entrance, and then nothing. He sat there for a long time, snow settling around him, the rifle heavy in his hands. Scout pressed against him, whining softly. Ethan looked up toward the mountain's peak, the sky above it glowing faintly red through the storm. "Rest now," he whispered. "You kept your promise." Then, somewhere far below, beneath the tons of rock and snow, a single lantern flickered, once then twice, before fading into the dark. The storm over Alder Ridge ended by dawn. Sunlight pierced through thinning clouds, washing the mountains in pale gold. The snow had settled into silence again, covering the blackened trees and broken machines like a shroud. Ethan Rose stood at the edge of what was once the North Ridge, a rifle slung over his shoulder, his breath rising in soft clouds. Beside him, Scout sat quietly, his fur dusted with frost, amber eyes fixed on the mountain that now lay sealed. The explosion had stopped the company's advance. News crews and government officials would arrive in days, maybe hours. But for now, there was only stillness, and the faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to vibrate beneath the snow, as if the mountain was still breathing. Ethan dropped to one knee, brushing aside the powdery white. He placed his hand on the cold stone. "You did it," he whispered. The words caught in his throat. He had seen men die in war, but Walter's sacrifice felt different. Not duty, not despair, but peace. The old man had given himself back to the mountain, as if returning to where he had always belonged. Scout whined softly, pressing his muzzle against Ethan's arm. "Yeah," Ethan said, rubbing the dog's head gently. "I know, we'll keep it safe." He opened the pack that had never left his side. Inside were Walter's journals, now bound in canvas to protect them from the snow. The pages still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Ethan flipped one open, sketches of birds, weather notes, the careful handwriting that had chronicled a lifetime. At the bottom of one page, he found something new. Words written in a rougher, fresher hand, likely in the hours before Walter's final stand. "If anyone finds this, remember, the forest does not forget kindness. Keep listening. The land speaks through those who care enough to hear." Ethan closed the book, his throat tightening. He looked toward the valley below, the place Walter had once tried to protect, now littered with abandoned equipment. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel lost. The war he'd been fighting inside himself, the guilt, the isolation, had found its echo here in an old man's faith and a mountain's endurance. He rose slowly. "Come on, Scout. We've got work to do." They descended the ridge through the quiet snow. By the time they reached the valley, the wind had stilled completely. Ethan stopped beside a fallen sign that once bore the words, "Greenvale Development." He lifted it, drove the post into the frozen ground, and with his knife carved new words over it. "Alder Ridge Preserve, in memory of Walter Kane, keeper of the mountain." When he stepped back, the sunlight caught the letters, gleaming faintly through the mist. Scout barked once, tail wagging as if in approval. Ethan smiled faintly. The first true smile in a long time. Weeks passed. Investigators came and left, unable to explain the collapse. The government declared the mountain a protected reserve, citing unstable conditions. Cobb vanished. His company dissolved into silence. Nature, as always, began its slow reclaiming. Moss crept over steel. Roots split concrete. The mountain healed, and Ethan stayed. He built a small cabin near the valley's edge, far enough to see the ridge each morning. He spent his days transcribing Walter's notes, sending copies to universities and conservation groups, telling anyone who would listen about the man who had given his life to keep the forest alive. Sometimes, at night, when the wind blew down from the ridge, Ethan would step outside and listen. Scout would lift his head too, ears pricked. Through the whispering pines, Ethan swore he could hear a voice, low, calm, and familiar, carried on the mountain air. "Keep listening." And he did. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles wrapped in light. He sends them hidden beneath storms. Walter's sacrifice wasn't just the end of a story. It was the reminder that faith still breathes in quiet places. The mountain stood because one man believed that goodness, once planted, can outlive even fire. And maybe that's the same miracle we forget in our daily lives. Every act of kindness, every prayer whispered for someone else, every moment we choose compassion over anger, that's how we protect the forests within our own hearts. We all carry our own Alder Ridge, the place where loss meets faith and where God waits to show us that light still grows even in ashes. So tonight, before you scroll away, take a moment to whisper a small prayer for the people who fight silently, for the wounded world, and for yourself. May the same God who watched over the mountain watch over you and your family. If this story touched you, comment Amen below to keep the faith alive. Share this story with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that will remind you hope still has a heartbeat. May God bless you, protect your home, and keep the fire of compassion burning in your heart.